This is Music Moneyball, the podcast that explores how to unlock the hidden value in music catalogues. Brought to you by Standard Innovation, the data consultancy for investment funds. Welcome to another episode of the Music Moneyball podcast with me, Emma Griffiths, and my co-hosts Tom Mullen and Sam Morey. Our guest today is one of the top deal makers at the heart of music catalogue M&A, so she understands not just how rights get sold, but how value gets created. She's a partner at Fox Rothschild, working on catalogue sales, corporate transactions, and entertainment deals, and she started her career inside EMI's legal and business affairs team, so she knows how this industry works from the inside out. She's ahead of the curve on how the acquisition market is evolving, from deals that are deeper in bites to catalogues that are more global in scope and less dominated by traditional Anglophone hits. She's also been recognised by Billboard, Variety, and The Hollywood Reporter as one of the leading music lawyers and deal makers in the business. Please welcome Cynthia Katz.
Well, thank you, guys. Happy to be here. That was a lovely introduction. I feel honored.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Cynthia.
Excited to chat.
Yeah, so we are super excited to dig into what you're seeing in the market, Cynthia. We thought we'd start with, just what you're seeing in the market at the moment and how it's evolving. Obviously, established markets like the US and the UK feel more mature now, but they're also changing shape. And there's more institutional capital around and, a much stronger ecosystem of buyers and sellers, especially on the secondary side. So when you're sitting across the table from your institutional clients today, what are they actually asking for?
Sure. So just to kind of set the scene, I represent numerous large private equity funds and then also some strategic buyers as well with, a steady, robust stream of deals coming across. We've been doing this now for 15 years or so probably, but the real boom maybe being the last 10. And then obviously when we had interest rates that came down around COVID, that was maybe like the height. But I'm still seeing a very, very strong, very active market with optimistic forecasts across the board. Some pricing has come down a little bit. I mean, you have healthy competition. And everybody is still recognizing these assets as, some of the best alternative, asset structures. We have new financing schemes. There's a lot of interest. Everybody wants in. There is more demand than there is supply. So that is keeping multiples up. But we also have, high interest rates and, other macroeconomic conditions that have somewhat settled multiples a little bit and kind of kept pricing perhaps not at the peak. But it's still fairly stable and willing buyers and willing sellers are meeting 10 times a day every day. As far as institutional investors, the way that things are shaping up and how it has changed, I think that there's a much higher level of sophistication now than there was even 5 years ago, where a lot of these investors, that are coming out of finance, music was something they had to learn, their finance first. And so there was a little bit of a, jump in and figure it out kind of later. And then obviously you learn from mistakes and you learn, how unique these type assets are, and that they're not necessarily the same as just investing in real estate or other types of financial products or commodities. So we're learning. They're starting to demand a higher level of data and reporting and understanding exactly, trying to clean up catalogs and make sure we have all the correct ISRC codes and, that we're not having leakage anywhere and, that everything is properly registered and, can certainly get tricky too. They're learning how there are sometimes 10 different versions of the same song and, that artists sort of have been at multiple different PROs and, CROs over the years and not, different publishers and labels and how important it is to get all the splits and the royalty rates, everything correct. and to make sure that all of the metadata matches up everywhere along, the chain, to really maximize the value of these assets. So they've gotten more demanding in terms of the level of diligence that has to be done and how clean and precise the schedules and the diligence materials need to be before we close. We've also gotten, just more. It used to be kind of a little bit. We just want to get the deal done. We've agreed on the material terms. What's going on? And I think that as we've done more of these, and as people are looking to secondary markets too, they're having a better perspective in terms of, okay, well, are we going to securitize? Are we going to sell the fund in a couple of years? What is the next, investor or person in the chain going to demand? So it's not just about, our risk tolerance, but it's about their risk tolerance. So that's just sort of forcing everyone to level up in terms of how much they really dig into the details, and there's a lot of details in music assets. So, you
Is
know
that trend, Cynthia? Is that kind of happened more in the past few years compared to previously, or
yes,
where's that level of diligence has kind of come in?
I would say in the last even, 3 to 5 years, it has dramatically, or at least noticeably, increased the demands that we are getting for cleaner and better data and, less risk tolerance, I guess.
And is that correlated as well to the types of investor? So you said you represent, some institutional capital, some family offices or high net worths. Do they have different demands and requirements, or are they roughly trending in the same direction?
So that's a good question. Actually, it's funny, the strategic buyers, I think, will tolerate a little bit messier of a, catalog because I think they have more control, and they also have more of a historic perspective of, that's how the music industry is done. Things are messy a little bit. They remember, back in the day when, we had people would, handwritten contracts lost in boxes. Nobody knew who owned what. You know, we didn't have good reporting, so they have a little bit more of historical context in terms of where we've come, um, and also because they have more control. Generally, they're more in the weeds on the administration, and they have more of the relationships to clean things up post close. They have a little bit higher risk tolerance than some of the funds and financial buyers who also have more people to answer to, in terms of LPs and, even retail investors now that are starting to get into the mix, and as everybody's interest in securitization, um, they are a little bit stricter on the data, and I think that's also just the nature of the industries that they've coming up in finance as opposed to coming up in music. You kind of have a different perspective on numbers and spreadsheets and data and all of that. So that's a little bit different. Then on the other hand, you have these family offices, which um, sometimes have even less of an understanding of the music industry, and so that can go kind of two ways. Some of them, they just don't even know what they should be afraid of. So sometimes they just want to and they also sometimes have less of a reputation, so they have less leverage. Everything always in all deal making comes back to leverage. How much can you drag a deal out? How much can you take your time and go slow? Every seller wants to close yesterday, and where's my money? Where's my money? You know, what catalogs can you go after? More sophisticated catalogs that have, more professionals on the sell side, helping to get the catalog in good shape.
Do you see a little bit of that as well? So people kind of proactively acquiring catalogs that are potentially not as well maintained with a view that they've got the infrastructure or the process that they can put some of that in place and actually achieve some arbitrage on the multiple through hygiene
Sure.
and cleanliness.
Especially, with the emerging markets, you will see, I mean, that's something that people are targeting, the biggest thing is how can I acquire this and then, optimize it, right? And especially there's an idea that if I clean it up after acquisition, if I, fix the administration and get things registered where they weren't, um, that there's a lot of that they're completely undervalued because they're missing money and that I can buy it and then, work to fix that, and clean it up. But, sort of as I alluded, you have to be the right type of buyer to be able to do that. You have to have the staff or, the money to hire, outsourcing or software or, figure out, how you're going to do that. But for the larger funds that I think really believe that they have the capability to do that, that's certainly a big focus. Where can I see catalogs that are undervalued because of poor administration, because of poor data, and then how can I fix that and better optimize it and realize that lost value.
Yeah. And could you talk us through some of the experience that you guys have had with those international markets? I think broadly there's an acceptance in the industry that the more traditional markets are reaching maturity, but there's high growth in other areas of the globe, and that those areas are particularly interesting for new acquisitions. But I think that there's probably significant challenges associated with those opportunities. And we'd love to hear a little bit about the experiences you've had.
Sure. So I've done a number of international acquisitions. Um, like you say, with every opportunity, there are challenges, and it's about finding the right balance of what you can work with. The one of the big advantages is that we haven't hit saturation with streaming across the globe. Also, regional or local artists or writers, particularly will have a lot of sync appeal in regional or local programming, and all of that is still growing at a much higher rate, and populations are just growing, at a much higher rate outside of the Western, Europe and Australia, United States. So there's tremendous opportunity there. There's also tremendous opportunity, like we said, because even those that have found success there are not being usually administered as well as they could be if things were better registered, if things were the data was better, all that we weren't leaking money. They would make more money. So there's a tremendous interest there. The challenges that come, one is just international tax is always a big issue, and currency volatility and risk. And so we have to start out with, okay, we're going to have money being paid from various payors in different countries, and what currencies, and how is that going to be taxed when it's repatriated and all that. So we kind of, and everyone is very familiar too, at least in the US, with, okay, what's going to be capital gains, what's going to be ordinary income, how is this going to work? It's a whole different set of considerations when we start looking at international tax regimes. Taking that aside, then you have all of these different collection agencies or societies, locally and regionally, that are collecting the royalties, administering the royalties. Some of them only operate in certain languages. Some of them have local presence requirements where you can only be registered and have an account if you have an actual local address, and that can be tricky. And then that leads to, we always find a way to do it if we want to, but, more creative structures in terms of joint ventures with some of the majors that have more local presence in different places, setting up new entities in different jurisdictions. You have some of these societies. I mean, even if you go back, I don't know, even 5 years at this point in the US, and you think about something like Sound Exchange, they were adverse to and ill-equipped at the concept of you selling your featured artist royalties and then, assigning that over was like, we can't do that, and we don't know how to do that. And, there was all of these weird things like DACA accounts that people were setting up where they wouldn't transfer it, but then you could have this secret bank account that was in the name of the seller, but then administered by the buyer. And and it took a while for Sound Exchange to say, okay, this is something people want to do. We have to create a bunch of paperwork and rules and processes, for how we're going to do these transfers. A lot of the societies around the world are just getting there or not there, not kind of signed up for that. And they have to create, standard letters of direction or assignment forms or bank account transfers. In general, every time you're moving assets around, there's a lot of administrative work that has to happen. And so obviously different distributors, labels, administrators, societies have different levels of staff and technological capabilities that they can actually handle. And then sometimes as deals get tricky where you're splitting, you're saying, okay, I'm selling 75%, I'm selling 25, you're seeing a lot of split deals. That's a further accounting challenge for some of them. And then you have the copyright aspect where that is also extremely, tricky, where you have, in the US and in, some other, we know very well what copyright reversions, look like and how that works. And we know, how long you have registrations for, and we know what it means to be registered or not to be registered and, all the different acts. So now we have to learn the laws in different countries and then what rights do they have if it was created in one country. And, for example, there are certain countries that, the producer typically owns the copyright and others, it's more the recording artist, and some, whether you register makes a difference, and some, they don't have a copyright registration regime. And then, for example, in the US too, if you want to perfect your interest in certain things, we have a whole UCC, security interest kind of filing system. And then we have the Copyright Office, and there are different paperwork that you do to perfect your interest. Every other country and regime has a whole different set of rules, and sometimes you're not able to protect yourself as well. And then you get to the question of enforcement. If there's an issue, where are we going to be able to enforce our rights? Where does the seller have assets that we could potentially, go
Right.
after if we have issues?
And do you try and always bring that back to the US jurisdiction, or is it just unfeasible to do that?
We try to operate in the US the best that we can because it's just the most robust system at this point in terms of rules and there's just
Well,
the
and the one
volume.
that you
Yeah, and the
guys
one
know
that,
best
yes.
as well, right?
Yes, for sure. That helps. And that also helps just, when we have to have multiple counsel and multiple, which we do often, but, the fewer lawyers we can have to involve, the better,
Yeah,
I guess
right.
our clients
And
would
like
say.
when you go through some of these deals abroad, I suppose first question, are you seeing as much deal flow or an increase in deal flow from international opportunities? Is it trending upwards,
It's definitely trending upwards. It's not, at the same volume that you're gonna have,
but maybe growing a bit faster?
but it's growing. It's growing a bit faster, and everybody is identifying, that as a large portion of the future. And I think, it's they're both happening. The increased interest is also,
Yeah, right.
increasing investment in the infrastructure in those countries, and they're to try and be able to meet the demand. Um,
And are you guys able to kind of put in place some structures that are repeatable that make some of these challenges a bit easier over time? Or is it really every single deal is a new one, a new challenge, some new dragons behind?
Yeah. So yes, we are doing that, and in particular, the question is, do we set up entities? So that's another thing too, for various tax reasons. Sometimes in other jurisdictions, it's more advantageous to do an equity deal where you are buying, a company that, and whether it might be you're investing in a label and the copyrights that they own, or the artist has set up some sort of, single purpose vehicle where they um, house their assets, and then you buy that vehicle rather than buying the assets out from the
Ah,
vehicle. But
okay. Interesting. Yeah.
then you have to often then you're going to continue to operate on a ongoing basis, sometimes, in a company in another jurisdiction. So, um, we have set up entities, and largely this is driven by tax planning, but we have set up some entities in certain jurisdictions where we feel we're going to do multiple deals, and then continue to use those vehicles, and try to everyone, how can we not reinvent the wheel every time? How can we, because what the biggest thing that has happened that I feel has been great over the past 5 years is setting standard. Everybody wants, standard policies, procedures, efficiency, let's run smooth as we can. Let's standardize our diligence reports and our diligence questionnaires and our forms and our exhibits. And,
Yeah, I can imagine that that's great when you've done it a lot in mature markets, but going into a new one, you're kind of having to do either all over again or just on a more ad hoc basis.
Yes. So we are trying, every time we do something, okay, how can we leverage what we've done? And also, the legal costs and the administrative costs of getting something set up, it spurs a desire to, let's not, have this be a one-off. Now we've done it, we can, like we built a butter making machine. We shouldn't make butter once. We should keep making
Yeah,
butter.
sure, yeah.
So I
Yeah.
don't know if that's a great analogy, but, something like that. So yes, that has definitely spurred, and we've had, some repeat deals where we're trying to do the same thing over and over.
And
Um,
other challenges, are they kind of equally spread across legal, tax, and commercial, or is there a bit of an imbalance? And does that change over time?
I think, commercial is always the easiest to overcome. We can always overcome commercial. Yes, there are certain cultural nuances, that are different in different jurisdictions. And some jurisdictions, there's sort of a different attitude towards creativity, and capitalism and things like that, and preferences too for local ownership. But commercials usually always can be overcome, and it's the easiest. We'll find a way to make a deal that makes everyone comfortable.
Right.
Tax. Tax is always important on anything, and it often can be the real driver because the numbers can get up there, and it's also something that fewest people understand. Like, whenever everybody says, like, "Oh, we have to bring in tax lawyers," they're the worst of all of the people are the least happy about that. Like, the copyright lawyers is less daunting, the, transactional M&A lawyers, but the tax, because it's complicated and people don't understand, and all they're hearing is, "I'm gonna owe a lot of money, and I don't know if I'm paying," with tax too, a lot of times, "I don't even know if I'm paying it right, or am I gonna get a letter," and that's governments, and that can be a little bit scary. Um, but tax efficiency, and good tax planning, um, which is something that, tax lawyers do. It's slightly different than, accountants, is strategy about minimizing taxes, if done efficiently, can, add up to millions and millions of dollars in savings. So that is always something that's going to be a driver. Um,
And I
and
assume that must be factored into the commercial discussions as well, right? So you need
yes,
to have a really good handle on what the tax implications are on the local regime, what they are for repatriating any money or anything like that. And
yes.
then,
And it's very tricky. It's something that we actually struggle with because it's expensive, right? So people wanna get into an LOI, they wanna get into exclusivity, they wanna make sure they have a deal before they start spending a lot of money on lawyers. So often, somewhat unfortunately, they get into an LOI, they don't bring the lawyers in before they have a deal, particularly not the most, something like tax that's never gonna give you an answer quickly or
yeah,
easily. They're
right,
gonna
yeah.
say, we need to spend a week and look at a lot of things and give you a large bill. So then after the deal is made, then, all of the tax lawyers and professionals get involved and they're like, okay, this structure's got some issues. How can we fix it? What could we do better? That kind of thing. So it's somewhat unfortunate that sometimes we have to like go back to the drawing board a little bit on structure after the fact. But, generally, like, it's got, the earlier the better that it informs the structure. And then that informs the commercial terms, the better. And then on the legal side, for the most part, while there are challenges, I believe that the good lawyer, will always find a solution. Whether, whatever we have to do, you can always be creative in terms
Yeah.
of
And I suppose it's a bit more
yeah.
after the fact, isn't it? Once the deal's been agreed, once all of the tax implications are understood, then it's over to you guys to find a way to make it happen in terms of operating model as well, whether that's local entity and then all of the paperwork that goes with it. Do you see that the the countries that you're more often operating in, um, do they tend to have relatively stable tax regimes, or i.e., so once you've kind of done your first deal, then you've got good precedent for the next one. You can advise your clients on what that LOI needs to look like, and they kind of have a bit more flexibility, or is it really changing a lot and every single deal's new?
I wish it was more stable than it is, but for some reason, like even the UK and the US, and I'll show you, like our taxes seem to change, all the time, and there's always something new. But at the same time, you have long-standing treaties in, among sort of major countries that tend to at least give you, some idea of the framework that you're going to be in, but we do kind of have to look at it anew. I mean, it depends on your time horizon too. If we're doing, 5 deals within 6 months, it's not going to change. It's
Yeah,
probably going
right.
to be the
Yeah,
same
if
because
there's a if there's
yeah,
a change in government or anything like that, or an annual budget, which we've just gone through recently in the UK, then clearly implications.
yeah. And it's funny because everybody always has this, end of the year push. It's always we have to get things done by December 31st, and nobody or few people articulate exactly why they feel that. I think it's somewhat a psychological, like, I started this in 2025, I'm finishing it in 2025,
Yeah.
um, kind of thing. But, and then some people even say, "Oh, well, I wanna close in this year, but then actually I want the income, in next year so I can offset," so then they wanna fund the next year. But there's always this sort of like, we've gotta get it done now because we don't know what next year is gonna be like. From a tax perspective, you'll hear that a lot, but, you know, usually outside of a big, election year or, something like that, there aren't too many crazy changes.
And are
But
you guys
yeah.
having to establish local working relationships, whether that be with local lawyers, local tax advisors, or people supporting corporate finance, investment bankers? Are you maintaining those relationships, or moreover, you're starting to invest in putting those roots down yourselves?
So it does always depend deal by deal, but generally when we're operating in a different jurisdiction, I mean, even if we have, US, choice of law, we are consulting with local counsel almost always. Y just to, have them sort of, even at the very least, give it a once over, make sure you're not missing anything, cover your bases. And we do always, maintain as a at least Fox, a large AM Law 100 for, we have relationships all over the globe. And then myself and some of my partners were part of the International Association of Entertainment Lawyers. So we, always reach out. It is a big network of professionals across the globe. And, we like something like the UK, all the major firms there, we all work together all the time, even on just regular, entertainment deals, you're always going to have, you know, British, US, a lot of crossover. So, we have good relationships with them, and those ones are always the easiest because it's just, hey, I got another one for you. Hey, how you do? We work together all the time. But even when I have a couple deals right now in the Netherlands and Sweden. I don't work with them as often, but I just reach out. Maybe it's second degree as opposed to first degree connections, and somebody introduced me to somebody, and we definitely have a network of international cooperation.
Yeah, which is super helpful.
That's great. Yeah.
Going through deals invariably, it's a bit of a people game as well, isn't it? You've got to pull everybody together, make sure that everybody's thinking in the same way. And do you feel that when you go into these new markets that you're having to do more education on both sides of the fence for,
Yes.
whoever you're representing, which is typically buy side, but then also kind of pre-preparing the sell side?
Yes, 100%. I mean, a lot of it always comes down to who the counsel is too. Um, you know, Counsel that and you have different kinds of types of counsel that you'll see across these deals. You have lawyers that are primarily music lawyers, or film and TV, and this is the one or two. They have a handful of catalog sales that have come up for their regular clients every once in a while, and they've been their lawyers for their careers, and they're kind of doing this. Then you have lawyers who are primarily M&A lawyers. They don't have too much experience or expertise in the music industry, but they've been brought in to do this sort of like larger type, you know, transaction. I mean, and then sometimes you have, just a random, it could be my uncle is a, whatever real estate lawyer, and he's kind of,
He's gonna come and look after it for
yeah,
us, yeah. I can
yeah,
imagine they're the most difficult ones where you've got somebody who knows enough to be dangerous, but doesn't really know the ins and outs, and then, the counterparty is advised in a slightly suspicious way, and you think, "Oh, crikey, big
yeah.
education job."
Yes, and it's funny because there are a lot of, like, norms and, obviously market standards and things that you'll see across what we quote unquote call normal M&A, or M&A in industries other than music. And then the way things are done in music is always just a little bit different. And so people who are really working in the weeds on this, all day, every day, like it's so much easier because we know exactly what is happening. And what people are agreeing to, how the forms are changing, what the issues are. We're all on the same page, so it really is its own unique kind of niche. And there are, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so lawyer, that you'll see that, they're doing sophisticated M&A in the music industry day in, day out. And so those are always kind of,
The best people to work with,
yeah,
right? Well
yes.
educated
Although sometimes they can,
in the specifics, yeah.
yeah, they can be, like healthy rivalries kind of,
Yeah, that I can imagine too. And
Yeah.
like outside of the tax advice and the complication that that brings, are there any other major pinch points that you've faced in doing deals overseas that people should look out for?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, one of the biggest ones that we have to look at, and when we look at what the different assets, we've got copyrights and we've got various income streams, and neighboring rights or digital performance, PR performing rights, artist royalties, producer royalties, um, writer um, copyrights, and then also just the income streams. Um, and name, image, likeness, and trademarks. And sometimes, often now, we're seeing a lot of bundling in of some film and TV royalty participation as well. And any all of the different collection societies in particular, related to some of these income streams, and also the registration systems for the copyrights and the reversion rights, and how, what how copyrights can be impacted, what kind of terminations can happen. Those are very jurisdiction specific. So one, you have to understand them, and then some of them, like all of the deals are easier. There's relationships involved with everything. Like for example, everyone who works at ASCAP, I know on a first name basis, or BMI or Sound Exchange. I can pick up the phone, I can call them. They know that this is our 10th deal of the week, and they know exactly what we need and who we are, and who we represent. And so we're just, things move more fast because, you know, we know each other, and that always, the human connection always makes all of the wheels go better. When you don't have those relationships, when you're contacting someone for the first time because someone gave you a name, um, can be a little bit more tricky. And also just when you're trying to set up, you can't just pick up the phone sometimes and call China. Like, you got time differences and language barriers and, cultural issues. So, you've got all of that. Um, you know, so I mean, it's really, the copyright, and the sort of society, um, you know, personnel and the personal relationships, and then just the legal, structures of the law and how that works. So those are all going to be an extra step that's going to make it more difficult. But I think, it's trending, and it's going towards, the upside is starting to justify the additional work. Um, and of course, everybody, there's always, like, first mover. We go back to, who really started this, real interest in the catalog market. And there's always a first mover advantage, and always, how do I find what's undervalued that other people are not, seeing? That's always the smart person, is what are other people, if you follow the crowd, or you're a leader. So everybody wants to be, or at least smart people want to be leaders. And they're going to go in and do the hard work, and try to find the opportunity, rather than, tacking on once it's sort of quote unquote more safe. So just given where, like, as we said at the beginning, I still think it's a very robust, a healthy market that doesn't have an end in sight in the, sort of more established Western markets. And because you can always, like you say, have secondary sales and, sort of repackaging. But there's certainly more growth opportunities, when we start looking, at emerging markets. So those
Yeah,
are,
yeah.
you know,
Let's skip to that. It's really interesting to hear how, like, everything works behind the scenes, because you see, I think one of our other guests was saying that a lot of these deals are done, like, behind closed doors, and kind of not a lot's made very public. So it's kind of nice to see there is a community feel across the globe,
yeah.
that gets these deals done and supports, obviously, the kind of end-to-end
It's so funny
ecosystem.
too, because the press, that tries to report what the best deals were that happened, and who,
Yeah.
they're always off. Like, you're always, you're
Yeah,
always
yeah.
like, well, that is half true, and sort of, maybe, you're not getting the full story. So, I mean, which I imagine is the case in anything. I think if I worked in politics, probably I'd be laughing at whatever stories, how they
Yeah.
spin it. But
I think it's like because there's famous people involved, they kind of cling on to the that and use it
yeah,
as, like, I think all media's kind of quick targets now, isn't it, already, in some respects, but depending where you read your news. Um,
yeah.
so, like, touching on those sort of opportunity sides, what are the kind of, from an emerging markets perspective, Cynthia, like, what are the most attractive opportunities you're seeing, and what do the best investors that you're working with kind of do to capture them?
Sure. So, obviously, there, is kind of a sweet spot of, the types of catalogs. We're looking at decay curves. We're looking at, like, different syncability. We're looking at, how strong they are in, streaming, and what the, potential for growth in streaming is based on where they are. We're looking at, like I said, sync and licensing opportunities. We're looking at branding, and how, which kind of goes in with sync in a way too, because it's always like, it's another way to sort of maximize, eh, the catalog goes hand in hand with the artist and then their brand, and then how they can be featured, as we are, more and more in sort of this digital world in terms of, your presence on various, there's a video aspect to everything. There's a social media aspect to
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
So, kind of, identifying where there's more opportunity because, of sort of a global appeal, and where there's more room, to grow, within a region based on, ability to be featured in sort of sync and licensing opportunities and branding.
Do
The
you think those are kind of, I suppose, those more opportunities that are kind of probably more optimized for in more mature markets are kind of newer opportunities in more emerging markets? Is that fair? Fair summary.
I mean, I think there's certainly opportunities, and they're different,
Yeah.
in different, like, and yes, you might, it's almost like, you have a lot of the sort of, new things that you can do with the older catalogs, introducing them to younger audiences. Like, there's a lot of things that have been done, with kind of, everybody knows, like, the Kate Bush, and the Stranger Things example, or, some of the things that have been done with, Bob Marley, and, I mean, everybody knows but, like, the different experiences that and ABBA that they've done in Vegas with these sort of, you know, experiences, so to speak, and, kind of refreshing the way that younger generations are interacting with these evergreen, older catalogs. And then, it's different in the, maybe you're looking at younger, less sort of evergreen in some of the, um, emerging markets, but completely, the video content is just sort of coming into play in terms of, I mean, even, religious music across, the Arabic, and Islamic world, and a lot of programming that is starting to come to be created for children, and then, like, there's a lot more, new opportunities for expanding the reach of some of this regional
Yeah, yeah,
music.
yeah. I think
Um,
that's kind of, it's got multiple dimensions, isn't it? Music. It's not just like a sort of static building.
yes,
You can kind of,
yeah.
squish it in different ways. So if you were to, if an investor was looking to, suppose, go on the course of looking at more international rights, and you had to give them like the top three things to kind of avoid, or like bear traps to avoid, for example, like what would those three things be? Like, it's so they don't sort of go down the potholes, so to speak.
Sure. So for one, um, buying catalogs, unfortunately, where, the data and the paperwork, to support, where people sort of say, like, famous last words, well, we haven't had any issues, and we had, and everything's been okay. Like, you got to be really, really careful, about the paperwork, supporting, all of the creative contributors. Everybody's obviously talking about AI right now too. So we're also looking, at what regime we're in and where they are on AI, and how we think that's going to impact, the value of the IP, just in general, the
Yeah,
copyright
yeah.
regime. But, having good data in terms of, all of the metadata that's gonna get you, because ultimately that's going to be how we collect money, is by following the data and, tracking it, using that to get the royalties that we need on all. We don't 100% know what the future is going to be in terms of, how these things are gonna get exploited. Um, but tracking is at the heart of it. So where the data is not there, it's going to be more difficult. And when we're looking at when the paperwork is completely absent, that's going to be more difficult. Then you're crossing your fingers about lawsuits. And um, also a lot of payors and societies and everything like that, when, sometimes when there's any discrepancy about what the right splits are and who should get paid what, they just kind of throw their hands up and say frozen, until
Yeah.
we figure it out. And that can be really tricky. I've had a couple ones where, we have these holds that are put on because somebody even makes what we think are uncolorable claims, but they're like, you sort it out, go have a lawsuit and come back, or go find a paperwork and come back, and we're just going to hold all your money until, you show me, proper chain of title. So, and then obviously there's time value and delay, and, while payors are holding things, and you're not collecting, that's not great. So, those are kind of the, big things that you have to kind of, um, look out for. And obviously sort of the other side of the coin is where you have more control over the assets that you're buying. I mean, that's always great, but you have the ability to, select the right partners to help
Yeah.
you sort through it post close. Because sometimes if you get something through the right label or the right publisher, or they can help you with the work in terms of getting things registered, in terms of cleaning things up, in terms of, making the connections that you need to get to help you clean it up. Um, and you can find the right partners, and you can, engage the right, consultants and all of that when you have more control. So,
Yeah.
um,
And how long did that take? So I think we talked a lot about kind of getting deals done, but I think you mentioned previously, Cynthia, when we spoke last week, about how there's quite a lot of effort that goes into, the post close. How long does that generally sort of take?
so I mean, well, the best case, the easiest, cleanest, perfect catalogs that, we've bought and sold, I'm going to say like 30 days, and, from LOI to close, and maybe 6 months post close. We're working on making sure all of the
Yeah.
money is flowing the way that it needs to, that, portal access is provided, that statements are going where they need to go, that, any kind of filings and registrations have happened, and that's it. Um, you know, Worst case, we have deals that take a year to get done and then take a year post close. Well, actually, worst case, I have one that's 3 years post close, and we're still trying to make it, um, you know, flow the way it's supposed to flow and work the way it was supposed to work. Um,
Yeah. That's
but
interesting. So is that a lot of the things you talked about before with getting all that detail, like the ISRCs? Is there any leakage? Are you registered? What are the splits? Is that all feeding
um,
into optimizing the kind of post close work, right? I'm assuming.
yes, of course, the more you do up front, the smoother you're going to have on the back end. And it's just a question of balancing, you know, sort of where the right place to get it done. I mean, and then we always have conversations of like, everybody wants to close, but these are the issues. Do we do a holdback? Do we do, you know, some kind of like deferred, payment structure tied to, we're missing certain agreements, or certain things
Interesting.
need to be
Yeah.
notarized, or, there's a lien or something. Once it gets removed, then, and how we kind of, and often that gets discovered during diligence. So it's a revisiting of the initial commercial terms, and we do
Right.
something like that. And then sometimes
Yeah.
we're happy that we did that because we got the deal done, and then everybody's happy and in a, cooperative mood, and we just sort through it. And sometimes we're like, that was the biggest nightmare, because as soon as we closed, everybody disappeared, and
Yeah.
now
Right.
it's a year later, and we're nowhere towards getting
Yeah.
where we
There's
need
no
to
kind
be.
of tie-in. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you've got one of those deals that's long running, how do you typically distribute existing revenues?
So, I mean, and some of it is often, sometimes there's holds and everything is on hold. And then that in
By
somewhat,
that, do you just mean that it's going into like an escrow account or a third party account or even your client account for the time being, or what?
sometimes it's going into an escrow account or something like that, or sometimes the label or the publisher or the society is holding it for you
Okay.
and not paying anyone, and just holding it. And then unfortunately, they're probably keeping the interest to the extent that
Right.
there's, because that's another thing. If you're going to have a hold in a different, then there's some negotiation about if there's interest and who's keeping the interest and who's paying the fees and all of that. And then that somewhat depends how much money it is, whether it's worth even having those negotiations or not. Um, but a lot of times, like even going into a deal to just to, you might alert the payors, to put everything on hold and not pay anybody, because when you're sorting out which money should go where, and then it goes to the wrong place, and then you've got to claw it back, and then you got to move it
Oh,
over, and then
right.
you got
Yeah,
to
of
do
course. Yeah.
deductions, and then every time you do that, is it a taxable event? Is it recorded as income that then you got a deduction? So sometimes it's just easier to put all of the money on hold while you're sorting through a deal. And then also some of that is leverage in terms of incentivizing. You're always like, what's incentivizing people to cooperate? What's incentivizing people to be efficient?
Yeah.
So
Do you think you've reached like a best practice kind of like model for that now?
yeah, I think we have a learning from experience, perspective on it, in terms of that. But then it also always comes down to leverage in certain deals too. Like, I know what I would like to do that's best for my client, which is often of a different opinion than the other side.
Yeah, right.
And it's just a question of what leverage we have. If we can say this is the way we're doing it, and there's no more room for accommodation, or we have to bend over backwards because we don't want to lose the deal. So that kind
Yeah,
of
yeah. It's kind
always,
of a balance of risk and
yeah,
reward, isn't it? Always
yeah,
is.
you know. And I
Yeah.
mean, it's always nice when you have more leverage, but you usually have less leverage with the more exciting, like, "Ooh, I really want this."
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So it's like tricky, what kind of deal do you like? When your clients call you, every other day, or whatever. We had a new deal, it's like, and then they say a name, and it's someone you really like, or someone big, or someone you're like, oh, exciting, and then you're also like, uh-oh, because sometimes the bigger the name, the big, like, the more
Bigger their
pain in the butt
expectation.
it's
Yeah.
gonna be, and the less power you're gonna have. But then sometimes it's like, oh, it's so and so, and you're like, who? Then you're like, all right, this one's probably
Bit more
it's gonna
trivial. Yeah.
yeah, gonna be more trivial, and we're gonna have all the power, and it's, gonna be an easier deal to get done and be efficient, but it's less sexy. So, usually the more sexy, the more difficult, but, you know, a
Stands
good
to
healthy
reason.
mix. Like, we usually like to
Yeah.
have, you know, one sexy one and a couple easy ones at the same time is a
Nice.
good balance. Yeah. And then, it also helps to, like I say, the more that it's the same lawyers, I'm buying from you today, I'm selling from you tomorrow, like, helps everybody, or at least it should, but it does a little bit, um, not always, you, push the leverage to the maximum
Yeah.
extent that you can, because you're like, I'm gonna need you, I can't make this
Yeah,
help
well,
you.
ultimately, you might be on the other side of the table in 3
Yeah,
years' time when redoing the
yeah.
deal on behalf of another customer or
Yes. That's actually funny too. I've had some, so where, like, um, we had, certain lawyers and were involved in buying the assets from the artist for one fund. And then, a couple of years go by. Now they're presenting another fund that's buying the first fund. And then they're trying to sort of re-diligence the diligence that they did the first time. And then you're like, oh, I'm looking at my own work from, 5 years ago or whatnot. Or, I'm doing diligence for the bank that's securitizing the assets, and, that, like,
Yeah,
it's all
yeah.
over the place. Or even more so, I have some partners too who the underlying recording agreements are from when they were at the label, and they're like, oh, that's my signature, on that document from 20 years ago. So,
Yeah.
um,
I thought it was interesting though what you're saying about how there's more focus on all the different kind of component parts earlier. I think at the start of the podcast, because we've not really heard that before. A lot of people have kind of said, yeah, it's a bit of a theme, but no one's kind of gone explained actually these are kind of requirements from a buyer perspective now. So that's quite interesting.
yeah. All of there's a lot of different moving parts in all of these deals, and a lot of different income streams. And then obviously diversification makes everything more valuable. So the more different income streams and payors and types of rights that you're bundling together, the more complicated and difficult, but then the more value, because you're diversifying the risk that, if one payor or whatever, puts a hold, or there's an issue with one type, you've got others.
The catalogs in the same kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
And then of course there's the other piece. I mean, aside from, the emerging markets, everybody's also looking to some of the more independent stuff. That's a big theme of this year, which, is often underexploited in terms of, people think they could do a better job at finding new licensing opportunities for it, better, branding, but it's also got, probably even worse data collection and accounting and royalties. So, that's a big thing. People are looking at futures now. How can we bundle? We can maximize the value of the catalog, or help better optimize it by doing a futures deal as well. So for new music with the same artist that we can, which you often have more flexibility to do with independent artists than major artists, because, they're not already tied up. And so if you can get them on board to do a futures deal, they can help promote, futures help promote the catalog, like, if Justin Bieber puts out new music, it spurs an interest in some of his old music, that kind of thing. And then to the extent that, you're kind of working on frontline stuff, that's a little bit more branding, friendly. You have a new music out, that ties into more sponsorship opportunities, more social media posts, more things like that, which create more sync opportunities for older songs. So people are doing a lot of that, which is easier to do, like I said, with independent artists who are allowed to put out, new music with partners of their choice. So that's, another sort of big theme in terms of new types of deals that are going on. But and everybody's looking at new things too. There are people who are like, I only want to do, composer music, for film and TV. There are people who, I'm only going to do producers royalty streams because there's less demand for those, because they're more difficult to assign, because the producer is tied to the artist in a way that they have less control. And oftentimes they're not allowed to do things without consent of the artist, which can be tricky. You have a lot of producers that have produced, like, the top names in the business, and telling them, okay, they don't have, Kendrick Lamar and Justin Bieber on speed dial, even though they might have helped produce some music for them, years ago. But saying like, well, you can't sell your stuff without, getting them to okay it. They might not have the ability to do that. That was something that was surprising to me. I always sort of had this vision in my mind that artists and producers that they worked with, and, co-writers, that like they were always all really good friends and knew each other and could, but sometimes they don't see each other for 10 years, like not really, like they were kind of mushed together in a room, they're all traveling the globe doing what, and they're like, who? And they're like, your producer on your biggest hit. And they're like, oh. So, or like, who else was a writer on your song? And they don't even know, who wrote on their own songs. So that's what's always
I
very
guess that's going to
fascinating.
start influencing some of the kind of ways that perhaps things are going to change in the future as well, though, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe for producers to be less reliant on that, the way that the kind of revenue streams today through
yeah,
the
it's
recording side.
it's obviously going to be one of the really good things about AI that we're seeing is AI is going to change the way music is created. And it's a new tool for creation. So I think that will be really interesting to see how it affects the relationships, and how I mean, aside from all the issues that we have about completely AI generated music and cut it like that's trained, but even human made music, but just the tools and the process and the way that people work, um, whether that gets more sort of siloed because we have technology doing things.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Actually, we've talked a lot about AI on previous episodes, and invariably, we always talk about AI using existing music and maybe it creating music, and we having to license that out in a specific way through attribution or anything else. But we haven't actually flipped the coin and to say, well, hang on, if you're an artist and you use a bunch of AI, then should we be giving it some rights in this process, and how would that work? I think everybody's just assumed that, oh, well, we'll pay a license fee and that's that. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
definitely a
Yeah,
different
and the
perspective.
disclosure, it's interesting too. I think a lot of artists are using AI in certain ways, and whether or not they're disclosing the extent to which they are, is interesting. And just what the capabilities are and the tools, and how that it'll change how everybody works together and how everything will get tracked, um, is I guess to be seen. But like, I mean, if you think about it, even years ago, even before we even like when the only way to make a drum sound was to have a person hitting a drum, and we've gotten a lot of really amazing music out of you know technological advancement. So I'm going to be optimistic that um, it'll never be an easy path. There'll be hiccups, but hopefully we'll get to a place where we have more creativity as opposed to less, would be my hope.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
how funny would that be if actually what we ended up with is loads of amazing new music and just some of this AI credited as a producer
Yeah.
on a bunch of these tracks, rather than the inverse where
Yeah.
we think you get
Yeah.
stealing everybody's
I think it does
everybody's
give that
idea.
opportunity though to kind
Yeah.
of new artists who it's really hard to get through through a traditional route now. And I think we've talked about this before. Like there's been examples where um, some of the kind of YouTube stars now kind of never done a concert, but they're doing
Yeah.
pretty well on off YouTube,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, you can
And you
look
have,
at it different ways, I guess.
yeah. And then, we have, which is going to be tricky, but we'll have to see, at least the US Copyright Office has come out, and your sort of the position is obviously if it's completely AI generated, it's not capable of copyright protection. But where it is in the middle, it is, it's a combination of human and AI, and that, you know, sort of sorting that out, and they're almost like on a case by case basis, is going to be very tricky.
Yeah.
But
Interesting.
we'll figure it out, I guess. And then
Yeah, I guess there's a responsibility on both sides of the coin, isn't there? If you're going to use it and reference it, then there's
yeah,
maybe an obligation to do that, and vice versa. If it's going to use your stuff, and should it reference it and give
yeah,
you rights?
yeah. But so I guess
Amazing.
we'll see. But it's exciting. I mean, it's at the end of the day, like the music industry is and maybe you even lump it in with music is one form of content, but like IP and content and rights, it's one of the most enduring, not tied necessarily to macroeconomic trends, diversified, like best asset classes, I think, that will always stand the test of time. And particularly now, one of the good things that has come out of sort of the technological advancement, of streaming, and everything, it is more data. It's same with that is, I guess, across a lot of industries, but the data has just helped support kind of what we all know, about how valuable these assets are and makes
Yeah.
them more investable.
And
Because
also just the global reach of those platforms. We spent a bunch of time talking about the growth of new geographies and the impact. And I think invariably that's going to have a positive impact on creativity because you have different cultural references. I think we heard the other day that people were using historical music and current pop stars to do remixes and duets, and you see the likes of Ed Sheeran going off into different geographies using
Mhm.
different language and actually breaking down the barriers. I think that's a really positive thing too.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you talk about, the only way you used to be able to, access, like regional African music, would be in those
Go
jurisdictions.
over there, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you wouldn't go into Tower Records and
Yeah, yeah.
find that. And the fact that also you're able to experiment and see if you like it without, like, it used to be, a commitment. If you want to hear music, you got to go buy a CD, a tape, or whatever. So people are not likely to buy something they don't know that they like. But when you have the subscription all you can eat model, it's much more like, let me listen to this. There's
Yeah.
no additional cost.
Yes.
Let me see if
Much greater
yeah.
breadth and probably slightly less depth to begin with, but then down a rabbit hole and away you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cynthia, this has been amazing, but I'm very conscious of time, and I know that we have to get our famed quickfire round in.
Oh,
So, Emma,
okay.
should we jump onto that?
Yeah, this feels like a good time to move into that, Cynthia. So,
Sure.
kicking off, is there a particular song or album that is on repeat for you at the moment?
Hmm. Well, okay, so I'll give a couple answers. One, I have little children, and so there is always a constant, children theme, Coco Melon, Spider-Man, Danny Go, kind of children's music that is happening in the car all the time.
Yeah.
On the other hand, at my sort of core, I have just a love for kind of, 90s hip hop. So I always have some of that, just throwing out like, Camp Low or something like, saved.
Love
But
that. Yeah, great.
at the yeah, at the very moment, I also really have been listening to the Daisies from this past year from Justin Bieber. I think that might be, it's a really good song, one of the best songs of the year from last year. So, um, I find myself hitting that over and over again.
Nice. Amazing. It seems to be most of our guests are very influenced by what their kids are listening to. And then they have their own thing. So yeah,
Yes.
that's a common theme. And
Yeah.
Cynthia, you've obviously worked on so many interesting deals and with so many interesting people, but is there a particular pinch me moment that stands out for you?
Yeah, well, so I think one of the first, because you always have all these lawyer things, best lawyer, best da, 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 da. But when they had this, top women in music, and I think there were very few lawyers, and it was, a lot of artists and other people. And when I first won that award a couple years ago, I don't know, it felt really, really special to me. It felt like, oh my goodness, because I'm having a real impact on the industry. And some of the things, that they talked about, not just, amongst lawyers, but as one of the players helping sort of shape the market. So that one felt really special to me. And then it was also just sort of a looking at who all of the other women were, like, how much how nice it was to see, even from the beginning of my career to now, more power roles that women were having in, the industry, overall, and I just felt in really good company, so that was great. And then one of the early, well, not early, but one of the, it's only been a couple years, but bigger, now I've had many deals that are, everything is relative, right? The amount of money just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and you're like, "Oh, hundreds of millions of dollars, that's nothing." But when I represented Motley Crue and we sold their catalog to BMG, I think it was the biggest one at the time. And it felt like, crazy numbers that we were talking. And I was like, oh, wow, this is, like history. And now it's
Oh,
funny
that's cool.
because, yeah. Plus, I never, really thought as a child I would be speaking with, Vince Neil and, and Tommy, but,
Yeah,
you
proper rock and
um,
roll. I love that.
yeah.
That's
And
brilliant.
is there a particular opportunity at the moment, Cynthia, that you think is really underrated in music rights investment at the moment?
I think I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, I think people know where the value is in terms of independence, in terms of different markets, in terms of, and I'm certainly not the only one to say this, but gaming, I think, is something that probably not the only one to say it, but is going to be huge.
You are so
Music.
far the only one who said
Oh,
it. So there you
well,
go.
good. So
Clearly a
I'm
hot
going to
take.
say, yeah. Music and I actually know I represent labels that make music specifically for video games. And it's not even just licensing of existing music, like music that is actually made for the game. And some of these sort of super fans of the gaming, and then who also are on Twitch and whatever and doing that, they will know that music from the game. We all know the Super Mario like do whatever,
Yeah, right.
but like they will know the music that was from that, and I think will actually listen to that as a super fan kind of thing. So gaming catalogs, I will say.
Yeah, that's
That's
super
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
And last but not least, is there a particular song that you would own if you could own one? And what would it be?
Yes. Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas.
Yes,
Reusing
finally.
is gonna
It
say.
could be a very wealthy, very, very wealthy woman, with some generational wealth as well.
Yeah,
That
she's rocking it
yeah.
right now, I guess. Yeah.
Mhm.
Amazing.
Just
And how great would
a
this time of
steady
year
increase.
be? You'd just be like, that's me.
Yeah, be amazing. I mean, I think it's one of the, like, a few songs that literally has no decay curve. It just, from
Keeps on
inception
going.
keeps on
Yeah.
going.
Keeps on
I
going.
think, it'll outlive her as well, and
Yeah.
hopefully, has worldwide appeal, as it's just a classic Christmas song.
Yeah, it certainly is a
Fantastic
goodie.
choice.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Cynthia, really, you've been such a wealth of knowledge. Like we could
Oh,
speak to you all day, and I think this is like
same. This
an
is fun.
essential listen to anybody looking to get into, other markets outside of the UK and US and just thinking about things differently. So thank you so much.
Of course, it was
Yeah,
my
really
pleasure.
helpful.
It was
Yeah,
lovely.
thank you, Cynthia. It was a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to Music Moneyball. If you enjoyed the conversation, you can subscribe at standard-innovation.com to get every episode in your inbox. You can also follow the show on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube to stay ahead of the curve in music rights investment.